You're watching part 2 of my 2-part New Mexico series. Link to part 1 in the description if you haven't seen it yet. You should probably go watch that one first, though, because this one will make a lot more sense. Now, before I even start the video, I need to establish something very important, and that is the true scale of Carlsbad Caverns. See, the pictures I took inside of the cave came out phenomenal. I mean, I'm serious. Look at this. Look at this. What is this? This is one picture. But, as good as the pictures came out, it's very hard to tell the true scale of the cave in just 2D. And while the pictures look great, videos inside the cavern look like you filmed them on a pop toaster. So here's what I'm going to do. See this room right here leading into the main chamber of Carlsbad? You see this rock? Here's about how tall I am next to it. Got that in your brain? Okay. Now here is the full view of that room. And here is that same rock. Did I mention this is one of the smaller rooms leading into the main chamber? Yeah. It's freaking unbelievable. Okay, now, with that out of the way, an escape from the Trinity site, let me take you deep into one of the biggest natural shelters in the world. By total luck of both COVID season and snagging the actual last entrance ticket of the day, I got to explore Carlsbad completely and utterly alone. It was so mind-bogglingly empty that I actually scared myself multiple times when I ran into park rangers throughout the cave. After spending hours in Carlsbad and way too long editing this video, I've reached the exact same conclusion as when I first saw the natural entrance to the cave as to what draws me so deep into caves. They're just strange. Everywhere you look, caves beg questions, and they beg strange ones. How does this exist? Why does it look like there's a coral reef on the ceiling? Where does this chasm of death go? Who found this place? The short and long answer to pretty much all of those is time. As with almost all natural formations in America, long before modern settlers discovered Carlsbad, the caverns were known to native groups, both larger and more widespread tribes like the Apache, and smaller localized groups. But far before them, it became a symbiotic home to the bizarre mammal that would give caves one of their defining hallmarks: bats. Carlsbad in particular is home to thousands of Brazilian free-tailed bats, tiny black flying mammals that weigh about a half an ounce with an 11-inch wingspan. Around 400,000 of them roost in Carlsbad over the summer, and nearly 800,000 in the fall and spring, as they migrate between the southern United States and the Brazilian highlands, which is where they get their name. More than 50% of Carlsbad's roost is male, meaning that this is not a primary colony. However, there still are a significant amount of females that raise their young here. Babies, called pups, nest in the highest reaches of the cave where it's warmest, and every morning, mothers will return from their nightly feast to feed their young, and every single time will find their pup out of thousands tightly packed together, and researchers still aren't entirely sure how they're able to do this. Brazilian freetails are insectivores, meaning that they eat mostly insects as well as a lot of ants and moths around here. Every night, most of the colony will leave the cave in search of food, and 100,000 of these bats can eat up to 1,000 pounds of insects every night.
Come morning, the colony will return to the cave and spend most of the day asleep. Today, a huge portion of the cave just beyond the natural entrance is left unlit and undisturbed to allow the bats to sleep in peace during the day. Beyond the far reaches of the natural entrance, though, very few animals dare to venture, and even fewer survive. In 1898, 16-year-old Jim White enters the caverns for the first time. He isn't the first to find the cave or venture inside, as there had been several small-scale mining attempts of guano or solidified bat poop within the cave, but White pushes far deeper than anyone had gone before. He is the first to realize the true extent of Carlsbad Caverns and names several of the cave's most famous chambers, including the Big Room. White would go on to dedicate most of his life to the caverns, and in 1923 he led a General Land Office expedition through the caves, from which a picture taken by Ray Davis appeared in the New York Times. In January 1924, National Geographic writer Dr. Willis Lee publishes his journey through the caverns accompanied by White, writing, "Occasionally, a matter-of-fact statement from a geological discovery sounds incredible. Such was the case with Jim Bridger's first accounts of the Yellowstone geysers, or the redwoods of California. Now comes the announcement of a remarkable cavern among the eastern foothills of the Guadalupe Mountains in southeastern New Mexico, Carlsbad Cavern, so named for the little town about 30 miles to the northwest. Recently, explorers traversed several miles of its halls and chambers, and some parts of it were found to have such startling magnificence that on October 25th, 1923, by proclamation of President Coolidge, it was set aside as Carlsbad National Monument. The monument got its first lights in 1926. It was officially designated as a national park 4 years later. Entrance fee, $2. 2 elevators were added and completed in 1932, and 2 more in the mid-50s. Over time, the electric lighting infrastructure is gradually updated and replaced, and today, more of the cave can be seen from the walking path in nearly half the time.
But what is it like inside the cave? Well, it's cold but humid, and it pretty much never changes. Sometimes, colder air can sink in through the natural entrance and push warmer air out. But for the most part, like all caves, the deeper in you go, the more static the atmosphere becomes. Carlsbad remains at around 56 degrees and 90% humidity, every day and every night of every season. Carlsbad is filled with untold Lovecraftian formations to see, and the strange mix of cold but humid gives it its own feel. But the cave also has its own sound. Like the temperature, the dripping, too, is constant, falling from stalactites sometimes 80 feet in the air and landing on rocks or in cavern pools, echoing across the walls of the chamber. For me, it's the dripping that makes the cave feel alive. It was water, along with a mixture of hydrogen sulfide, that originally hollowed out the crevices within the weak limestone back when the cave was underwater nearly 60 million years ago. After the cave slowly drained as sea levels retreated, small amounts of water from the surface began to seep into the cave, dripping from the ceiling and onto the ground. It was these drops that carried a tiny amount of sediment that built up both where they fell from the ceiling and where they landed on the ground, each drop adding a tiny amount of sediment onto where the last drop landed. And over time, these tiny amounts of sediment built up stalactites, which droop down from the ceiling, and stalagmites, which rise up off of the ground. This entire process has been transpiring for about 15 times longer than the human race has existed, and is still happening right now. And as for the formations it's created, well, some of them speak for themselves.
In a cavern about 60 feet tall where I'm standing, over the course of thousands of years, these two formations are about a foot away from touching each other. The big room in Carlsbad, which is what you see right here, is quite literally the largest known underground space in the entire Western Hemisphere. These two formations right here, hanging from the ceiling, are, I think, two of the most impressive things I've ever seen in my lifetime. This formation here, the giant dome column in the big room, is 62 feet tall. This is one of the world's largest, oldest, and most incredible slow motion waterfalls. While an astounding 3 miles of caverns have been lit and opened to the public, nearly 30 miles of Carlsbad have been mapped, and new passages are still being discovered today. At many points along the trail in the big room, passages to the side will just drop off into absolute darkness, like this one from earlier. Jim White himself built this ladder in the early 1920s, and without the lighting we have today, he had no idea what he was descending towards the first time he climbed down it. What he found was a 90-foot drop ending in a small passage continuing into the darkness. Even still, this is nothing compared to other drop-offs like the bottomless pit, a 140-foot deep black hole. Well, it's been 72 hours alone. I drank all the Zia, and I'm down to my last Nature Valley bar. I think it's time. Well, this is it.
Vestibule.
Internet? What? Pizza Hut? Pipeline Punch Monster Energy? Wait a minute. Did I hallucinate the whole thing? Huh. You know, maybe eating out of those cans from the 1940s wasn't the greatest idea I've ever had. Oh, well, at least I can go home now.